Hi again, everybody. So I'm a jerk, and I left you guys on a huge cliffhanger last time with the sci-fi story. So without further ado, I'm gonna get right back to that. Um, when last we left our heroes, uh, Daniel was trapped down in the tangle as it filled up with nitrogen, and had just passed out as two indistinct figures came running out towards him from the elevator. Daniel woke up in the elevator, an oxygen mask pressed to his face like a silencing hand. He gasped, clutching at it, reveling in the flood of life that was rushing to his brain. Instantly afterwards, he was blinded by a headache so intense he thought he might vomit. "Easy there," someone said, their voice oddly tinny. "You had a near miss." Daniel looked around. He was lying on the floor in the elevator. Two blue-suited medics were holding him, one standing at the door, one kneeling by his side. Both were wearing gas masks. "Holy shit," Daniel said, unable to think of anything better to say. The medic kneeling at his side nodded, perhaps smiling under their gas mask. "We're gonna get you outside, then to a hospital," they said. "Unfortunately, this elevator picked up a little too much nitrogen down there, so I'd keep the mask on for now." Already clutching the mask to his face, Daniel nodded at them. "Thank you," he said. "You saved my life." "It's our job," the medic said. "But you're welcome. Thanks for not dying." Daniel managed to crack a smile, possibly because he was still lightheaded from lack of oxygen. The elevator slowed, then stopped. The doors opened with a pleasant ding, and the medic kneeling next to Daniel helped him to stand. Daniel was abominably shaky, hardly able to walk in a straight line. "Keep the mask on for now," the medic said, as they and their partner guided Daniel towards the door. "We're going to take you to the hospital, make sure there's no permanent damage, then you'll be free to go home and rest, which I would highly recommend." Daniel nodded, focusing on putting one foot in front of the other. He looked up as they passed the front desk. Angie was halfway out of her chair, semi-standing, looking at Daniel in horror. "What happened?" she demanded. "Are you okay?" Waving a dismissive hand, Daniel replied, "It's fine, Angie. I'll be fine. Just a little nitrogen leak." The other medical officer, the one who had not yet spoken, snorted. "Little hell," she griped. "Filled up the whole damn room in 5 minutes flat." "You want me to call anyone?" Angie asked, as the emergency response personnel shuttled Daniel past. He shook his head. "It's fine, Angie. Just make sure Suzanne knows what happened. I don't want to get fired for slacking off." Angie nodded once, decisively. "Will do. You take care, Daniel." "I will." Outside, they let him take the mask off and breathe real air again. 78% nitrogen, Daniel mused. So much of it everywhere. There was already an ambulance waiting for him in the designated emergency vehicle lane, and the two response officers bundled him into it. The rest of his day consisted mostly of taking hospital tests to confirm he wasn't going to die in the night, making sure his blood wouldn't suddenly bubble up with nitrogen and send a bullet of an air pocket rocketing into his brain or heart, making sure none of his brain had turned to mush, and reporters trying to get into his room to ask him questions. 9 hours later, they let him go home, with orders to rest up and not, under any circumstances, go back to work until at least Wednesday. Daniel was half tempted to ask for a doctor's email to Suzanne King so she wouldn't fire him. It was 8 p.m. when he got home at last, and he headed straight for bed, not bothering to shower or brush his teeth. He was dirt tired, and wanted nothing more than to cocoon himself in his sheets until the whole horrible nightmare burned off like mist at dawn. He peeled off his clothes and buried himself in the bed, as though hoping he would sprout when spring came. He lay there for several hours, wanting desperately to sleep, while the panic in his chest, still spinning its wheels and caught in the moment 12 hours ago, screamed at him that falling asleep was the last thing he would ever do. Unexpectedly, the phone rang. Daniel hauled himself out of bed, wandered to the phone, and tapped the screen once, answering. He'd never felt like paying the extra 50 cents a month for face chat. The sound quality was good enough that sometimes he would close his eyes and pretend Minami was standing in the room with him, speaking softly in his ear. Daniel? It was like he'd been shot, or thrown into cold water. He gasped silently, winded by the voice that had blown across 3,000 miles of silence to whisper in his ear. His ribs squeezed down on his heart and lungs, and his voice stammered in his throat. "Cole?" he said. For a long time there was silence, 3,000 miles of it, stretching off in looping roller coaster coils across the gulf of time. "I heard," he said. His voice was low, quiet, like a pond on a still day, unperturbed, imperturbable. And yet, was that a ripple of fear he heard? It was all over the news. Why do I feel like apologizing? Daniel demanded of himself. Dear God, pull it together, Daniel. I'm okay, he said at last. Well, sighed the mirror-still voice. Good. The silence unspooled itself, wrapping 7 times around the earth. Been a while, the voice commented. At last the waters shifted. 3 years. And 2 months, Daniel blurted. Dumbass, you sound fucking creepy counting months. Why'd you mention the months? And then, suddenly, why? He could almost hear the eyebrow raise, the dark eyebrow that petered out halfway down its length. Why what? Why did you call? A non-committal noise, familiar despite its long absence. Saw you on the news. 3 years, Daniel repeated. I thought you didn't want to talk to me. He closed his eyes and imagined the ocean-green eyes darting away to hide amongst the eyelash reeds. There followed a tired sigh, like a steep gravel hillside settling after a misplaced footstep. Yeah, stuff, you know. Daniel nodded slowly. I know, he confirmed. How have you been? Good enough. Still working on that astronaut thing? Yeah. Daniel could feel the silence being wound up from the other side until it was pulled taut. Well, good talking to you, the voice said. Yeah, Daniel replied. Can I call you again sometime? Again the sigh. Nothing's stopping you. Well, glad you're not dead. Bye. The silence that followed was wide and directionless, spread out across the whole universe. The line had been cut. Carefully, Daniel opened his eyes. The light on his phone was red. The call was ended. Bye, he said quietly. He lay awake in bed, paging through photograph memories he'd long ago thought to be forgotten. Minami could tell. He saw it in her face as he opened the door for her. How are you? She asked. There was a wariness in her voice, a premonition in her tone. I'm okay, Daniel said as Minami stepped in. Been better, been worse. She rounded on him. What happened? She asked. Startled, he stammered out his answer like a telegraph. There was some kind of nitrogen leak, he said. She shook her head decisively. Between Sunday night and this morning, she said. You look like someone died. And don't even say it's because you almost did, because that's a different look altogether. Daniel shrugged. Coal called, he said. Oh, said Minami. He didn't dare look at her, knowing well the look she would wear. The narrowed eyes, the curled lip. And what did Cole have to say? He's glad I'm not dead, he answered. And what did you say to him? I said thanks for calling. That's all? Daniel shrugged. That's the gist of it. Minami sighed. Ordinarily, I would give you a lot more hell than this, but you did almost die yesterday. Suffice it to say that I'm glad you're over him and with me now. You'd better be, it's been like 4 years. 3. Moving on. Want some coffee? Minami, if it's all the same to you, I think I might like to be left alone. Don't be ridiculous, Daniel, Minami replied, walking past him into his kitchen. He trailed along like a kite. There's no way I'm leaving you alone here. Minami... She turned. You almost died, Daniel. You ever give any thought to how that makes me feel? I almost lost you. She turned away again, starting up the coffee maker. It spat hot water onto her hand. Ow! Fuck! Oh, Jesus. Sorry, it does that. I should have warned you. Here, let me... She was already running her hand under cold water in the sink. Forget it, she said, and then, softly, without looking up. You really scared me, Daniel. I don't think I could stand to lose you. She shut the water off and dried her hand, looking at it critically. Not actually all that bad, just hurt like a bitch. Daniel sighed. I'm sorry, Minami. I guess it's been a confusing couple of days, all right? All right. She turned, took a step forward, one hand halfway outstretched, as though she wanted to touch him but couldn't. The hand fell back to her side. Just don't do it again. If you die, I'll kill you. The automatic butler arm was hovering over Daniel's shoulder. He shooed it away, grumbling to it, Oh, go away, you piece of shit! Stupid arm. Minami giggled, covering her mouth with her hand. Sorry. Daniel crossed the short distance between them and embraced her, holding her so tightly it made his shoulders ache. After the briefest of moments, she returned the embrace, squeezing him until the air went out of his lungs. Can't breathe, he gasped hurriedly. She let go, standing away from him. Sorry, she said. Then suddenly he was kissing her, and she was kissing him, one of her hands gripping the tangled hair at the back of his head, the other in the small of his back, pressing his body to hers. He touched her bare arms, her hair, her back, her hips, tasted her breath as she breathed the life into him. Her lips were soft, but her kisses were desperate, intense, and he returned the desperation and intensity, feeling so suddenly and completely alive that it was difficult to believe he'd ever really lived before. Whatever little spark had been burning at his core, keeping him ticking for all these 23 years, suddenly blazed to life and filled him with heat and life. He broke away from Minami and took her face in his hands. Minami, he said, his voice half an octave deeper than usual, his heart pounding in his chest. Fuck me. Jesus Christ, yes, Minami gasped, and kissed him again. There was the smell of coffee, the hum of the washing machine, the afternoon sunlight creeping through gaps in the window. The sound of breathing, the smell of Minami's shampoo and bodies damp with sweat. God, Daniel whispered. No, Minami answered. Just me. The sheets were cold where they covered his left foot. The rest were on the floor somewhere. His back was sticking to the mattress cover. His stomach was churning. His breath wouldn't go all the way into his lungs, getting turned around somewhere at the very top of his ribcage. He could feel the sobs again, like a geyser building pressure. He tried to fight them down, but they seemed to be in his lungs, and the more he fought them, the less he was able to breathe. Tears slid down the sides of his face, one each, and trickled into his ears. "Daniel?" Minami said. He heard her head turn, but continued staring at his white ceiling. The numbness was gone, somehow, and there was so much feeling in him he thought he would die. He realized he was shaking. "Are you okay?" "Fine," he tried to say, but the moment he opened his mouth, the sobs came flooding out, and once more they shattered him. He curled onto his side, clutching Minami tightly, his head on her bare chest. She held him and whispered soft, sweet things into his hair until the sobs subsided. He was left lying there, broken and naked, feeling like the world's biggest fool. "Sorry," he muttered. "Shh, no, don't apologize," she answered. "It's been a hell of a couple of days for you." He chuckled damply. "This is so backwards," he said. She scoffed. "Daniel, you have no idea how much I used to cry after sex. Every time like clockwork. You get used to it eventually. And you usually haven't almost died." He smiled, spent a few moments listening to her heart thudding away in her chest. Hell, if I'm gonna be in mortal peril, I know, she said. "And honestly, I wouldn't have it any other way." "Crying and all? I think I got snot on your boob." Minami laughed, threw her head back and really laughed, not even bothering to cover her mouth. He could hear it resonating in her chest, and part of it resonated in him, too. "Oh, God, Daniel, you're a charmer, that's for damn sure." He grinned, looked up into her face. "I will never understand why you love me," he said. Her eyes sparkled. She lifted her chin and kissed the top of his head. "Someday you might," she answered softly, then pressed her forehead against his. "Someday you might." I think that's a good stopping place. So thank you guys again for joining me and for encouraging me to keep reading this thing, because I'm really enjoying it. And I hope you guys are too. Judging by the responses I've gotten so far, I think probably you are. But anyway, I will see you guys next time. And again, thanks for watching. So, bye.